All right. Hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan. I'm making another video today. This time, more or less, it's going to be focused on Mercury Retrograde. And I have already actually made a video for Mercury Retrograde that I recorded a couple weeks ago, kind of looking in advance. And I think I was using my astrology software while I was to take a closer look at things. But there's some, I recently had a communication with a friend of mine who lives overseas about some of the stuff I've been getting into with my astrology channel, and it sort of spurred my process a little bit, thinking about some ideas, right? And a lot of this, I have to admit, is kind of like not exactly original because I'm basically doing my best to there's a certain kind of a bandwagon or a certain kind of a cult thing that's art, regardless of whether I do anything about the age of Aquarius or that or the it's not specifically there's a couple of things that are mixed up, and that there's first of all the problem with the age of Aquarius, whether or not you take that literally as a real thing, and then the there's an Saturn, Uranus in Gemini and a trine to Pluto in Aquarius, as well as the Saturn Jupiter conjunctions, which are known as great conjunctions, which have entered into an air cycle. Although there's also the thing about this is you also have to take it with a grain of salt, in the sense that by putting all the emphasis on the age of Aquarius and the air cycle and Pluto in Aquarius and Gemini, this is all tropical astrology, and there are some people who are like fundamentalists for sidereal astrology. And that's a whole debate in and of itself, which I'm not going to get into now. But suffice to say that I am chosen the path of tropical astrology for now. But I think there is something to be said for this. There is a problem about global totalitarianism, right? And I mean, even if you don't take astrology very seriously, you can consider that maybe there's a room for this. There's also, it's interesting there, I'm going to get into this a bit later, but it's interesting. I'm thinking about it maybe because I'm recording in this room with my modular synth setup, that I also have a Bandcamp page in which I make music and then put it up on Bandcamp. And in the it's recently come to my attention that Bandcamp has switched their payment service to a Stripe or something, which is only available in certain countries. Like and there's this idea of like globalization from the perspective of like, if you are running a business and you're going to have payments that are accessible in different countries, or like if you go traveling and even if you like something like that, do you expect your Interact debit card to work, or is there like a whole different banking system that you have to adapt to? There's things like that in terms of like a global market, right? Versus a increasingly kind of fragmented and separated and balkanized or whatever, right? I'm not really sure I'm going in this direction right now, but I will get, there's some, it'll be coming up. But to introduce this, what I'm kind of getting at with this is, I have to also admit that with, what I'm kind of getting at is that Mercury is in Leo, in retrograding, and it's in this opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. And when it's also hitting alignments to most of these outer planets, this weird basket formation thing we have. I'm basically, a lot of certain things that I'm thinking about is my own attachments, to certain things, such as technical mercurial things, such as, gear or perhaps making videos where I have big bookshelves behind me, and the tendency, perhaps, there's also this basic thing is that I've been resisting starting a Booktube channel or just like dropping the astrology thing and just talking about books. And part of the reason why I've been doing this is that I've noticed that there's typically like the way that Booktube channels work is like you'd be doing this thing where you're like, hey guys, I got a big book haul. I'm just going to show you like without the spines there. And I'm just going to be like, look at all these, or like, there's this, I have to admit that I suffer from a kind of a neuro-spicy divergent condition of, yeah, I'm not going to get into all that detail right now, but I've met people with similar conditions. I don't even know that somehow they're able to like, maybe maybe they're taking the right drugs, but if you have ADHD or something like that, how much reading can you focus on anyways, right? And I have to admit that what I have here is not a stack of books that I just got in a book haul. I'm going to show off some of my Carl Jung books. For example, this is a banger, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. This is a book that I've been reading for years and I still haven't finished. This is actually, when it comes to like my decision to get into astrology, this book, Synchronicity by Carl Jung, played an important role, but basically being interested in the topic of synchronicity and then just like flipping it open and finding a lot of stuff about astrology in here, star charts or whatever, and then just think the little like astrological symbols. There's stuff in here like, since antiquity, the main traditional astrological and alchemical correspondence to marriage has been the conjunctio solis e lunae, the conjunctio lunae e lunae, and the conjunction of the moon with the ascendant. So it's kind of like whatever I was expecting. I get this, and it's just like, oh, is this just Carl Jung going off about astrology, right? And it was from talking to people about how much Jung was into astrology that got me into doing it kind of in the first place. So and I've also been reading Jung since high school, right? And this is just some of the Jung. I'm just showing you some of the Jung books I have here. Another one, Undiscovered Self. This is one that I have read all the way through, and I consider it to be perhaps one of the more conservative. This in the era of Jordan Peterson. This feels like you can kind of feel the conservative pressure to make yourself, to make yourself worth your salt as a human being, right? To really validate your existence by not just being a dependent leech on society, but standing up and not giving into the pressure of the weak-brained communists or whatever, right? Like this is the another one I have is the Psychology and Alchemy. This is another one which I have only, if you see where the bookmark is, it's a massive tome, and it's actually got a lot of pictures in it. It's got a lot of like pictures and things from children's fairy tales and talks about dream imagery and all sorts of things like this. And I've only made it this far, and I've owned this book for, I don't know, probably nearly a decade now. Maybe not quite that long, but I also recently, I did meet up with some internet friend, go to a bookstore, and I found the Flying Saucers one, which there's one difference between these two, you will notice, are published, one's published by Vintage, right? But the rest of these, there's something in common here. These four are all published by Princeton University Press. There's a reason why I'm showing off my Carl Jung books here. Now, the thing is that recently Princeton University Press had a book sale, and there's something funny about this where basically of the books that I was interested in that were for sale, there's a lot of these, the whole Carl Jung Princeton series, and I was thinking about buying some more of them. It was considered like the Mysterium Conjunctionis, Or what else is there? I think there's this one that was like it's the archetypes of the collective unconscious. There's a couple of these ones I was thinking about buying, and then I kept running into some kind of glitch where my order would just get stalled on the Princeton screen and wouldn't go through. And there's something about this which is like, it's also interesting if you consider that the timing of all this was also basically when Doge was like all the universities were like under attack by Doge. And I don't know if there's like, there's also, it's kind of funny because it's like, there are certain, when do you just read this? This is why I'm applying this to Mercury retrograde. It's also interesting to consider that back in March or April, perhaps, I can't remember exactly when I ordered this book, but it could have been the last Mercury retrograde that we had, right? That there's some kind of there's some weird thing going on about like trying to order books from the Princeton University Press book sale, which, to be fair, they had a pretty good deal there. I think it was like 50% off or something. Like, and if you're gonna buy these massive Jungian books, this would be the time to do it. But I was like, there's some kind of thing. It was like I was like I was like blocked by the computer gremlins. I was willing to shell out the big bucks for all these Carl Jung books, but I realized that, you know what, maybe there's some sort of like moral to the story, right? That like I already have Psychology and Alchemy, this massive tome of archetypal psychology, and I've only like in all these years I've only read this much of it, and like I'm gonna buy what 3 or 4 more of these, or like these Jung books, and like what I guess I'll be set for life, right? So there's something about this, and there's also some other books from other authors that I was thinking about getting, and I was just like, you know, this is what kind of thing is like, do you read this in such a way as like it's like there's some sort of like because I'm amassing a massive collection of Jung books already, that there's some kind of weird quirk in the glitch that's trying to like block me from like putting all this energy into being a Jungian and doing all this kind of stuff. And that like, or am I just sort of like, if this is just a totally like rational explanation for all this, and I'm just trying to make like assign some sort of meaning to it in my own little, because this is like, if you take the Lacanian approach to like psychosis, it's like there's this kind of like inherent lack to things. There's a void of meaning. We live in this cruel, dumb, meaningless world, and like in this, I have to prop up like the archetypal father being all like, you know, you can't have your dessert until you eat your dinner, basically, right? You're not just gonna go and order a fuckload more of these Carl Jung books when you're just piling up your house with these ones that you've had for a decade that you haven't read yet, right? And then I was, or is it that they're the actual daddies of our society, these patriarchal figures, have decided that reading is for pussies, and we're not going to let Canadian people buy a whole bunch of books from Princeton, you know, those, you know, are like, I mean, is the anti-intellectualism become built into the structure where even if you want to buy a bunch of books, you can't, and it's like, or you get into a paranoid conspiracy that the government is plotting against you to stop you from reading Carl Jung, right? Or else, but then the thing is, I realized, what if I just use my phone to order the books rather than my computer? And for some reason, I was also like, well, what if, I was also kind of thinking that like, what if there is some kind of like, I'm not learning my lesson with like having too much Carl Jung books or something like that. And so maybe I should just like focus on reading the Carl Jung that I already have already, and not go overboard with collecting all this Jungian stuff, and instead buy some more Deleuze. And so this is another thing, is that I have to admit that I'm not doing this thing where I'm like doing a Booktube channel or showing off my book hauls, but I'm just thinking like, this is kind of like a follow-up to what I was trying to say yesterday. I made this video where there's this basic philosophical issue that I'm trying to deal with, and I haven't reached a conclusion. I seem to waver around on it, but this was basically the problem of immanence and transcendence. And there's something about, I like reading Deleuze, but I don't know if you're going to like, if you're going to portray Deleuze as if he has like a very, like, you know, being into Spinoza and stuff like this, right? One of the things is that I got this book, Expressionism in Philosophy, Spinoza. I also have another Deleuze book on Spinoza I haven't finished reading yet. I also have Spinoza's Ethics, which I don't think I've even started. But there's this idea of the Deleuzian, Spinozan angle to things, which I was just got this on sale because I didn't even know about this one, and it looks good. And it's also kind of interesting because I've been reading the Secret Life of Puppets, and they're all neo-expressionist kind of, and it just looks exciting. And then also Pure Immanence in still haven't read this yet, right? So this is the thing, is that there's something about, for some reason, I managed to like get the order to go through, and I managed to get the Deleuze books on the book sale, but not the Jung books, right? And this is all basically an anecdote, a lead up to this. I was talking to my friend last night about, he was kind of like, I don't know, maybe I was wavering in my self-confidence about this project, and my friend was giving me some encouragement and support and whatever, and about the certain direction of the age of Aquarius. And this is the other thing. I'm thinking, there's certain things in this Mercury retrograde process that I'm kind of reviewing. One of them is, should I just give in and start a Booktube channel for the hell of it? Although the thing is, I have to admit that I tend, instead of being these kind of people who are able to read massive volumes at a time, I tend to just collect huge philosophy books that are incredibly dense and difficult, and then start feeling guilty perhaps that I'm amassing a hoard of stuff that I'm not reading, and then taking too much time to get through it. And then instead of just reading very short books and then spending a lot of time contemplating them, and I don't know if this really makes for a good Booktube channel or not, right? But the other thing is, I do these really raw format videos where I'm not editing them. I just record them and I upload them, and I'm not like that. I could perhaps do a more of a video essay style format. However, or, you know, do more work with editing and stuff like that. Things like this are these kind of revisions I'm thinking of as, you know, going with this whole process. But the main point here is there's some basic issue that I'd like to highlight around my sympathy towards Carl Jung, and basically the fact that I was reading Jung when I was like a teenager in high school, and there's something about trying to just like approach it from that level, which is like I think the Jungian thing, as much as Jung has been an influence on me, there's something about it which is like, I feel like you could say the way, however, the mystery of the Tao, you know, the weird, the way that's the force that's flowing between things, it seems to have pushed me in the direction of getting these Deleuze books rather than just getting a whole shitload of Carl Jung books that I'm probably not going to read, right? And there's this question here about the pure immanence that goes with what I was trying to do with this Andrei Tarkovsky stalker stuff, and there's some kind of maybe in my process of doing this for a while, I'm starting to realize that one of the problems with using this idea of transcendence and immanence for Neptune is that there's a certain kind of bullshit factor involved, and that the idea, or like this, just because, you know, there's this basic element of things which you're not going to talk about, or that you're going to exclude from the conversation, or maybe like the guarded occult secrets or whatever it is, but they're not, there's something about the whole transcendent. I mean, I also have to realize that I took some philosophy courses, and there's this basic gist of the philosophy thing, basically taking courses from J.F. Martel, the stuff about Immanuel Kant, and I don't even know if I'm not inspired to carry on down this line, because I find reading Kant is kind of like, you don't read Kant because it's like a very, a page turning, stimulating read. I don't really find Kant. I find Kant kind of dry, basically, right? I find a lot of the philosophy, you're not like the actual. I don't know. It's like, you're not reading it for entertainment or in a way, right? But there's a basic problem about understanding the way everybody thinks about things, and that Kantian transcendentalism is just built into everything. In that, like, giving an example, even people like, even if you talk to people that are kind of like, you wouldn't think would be very educated, or it's like people are unconsciously ruled by a Kantian split, right? Or if you try to bring up spirituality to people, they might say like, oh, well, I just find that there's so much to take care of in ordinary, grounded, real life that, I don't have time to think of like, all the transcendent realm of like airy fairy stuff that's like beyond everything, right? Because I just have so much responsibility to take care of for my imminent grounded life, right? And so that there's whatever you're like saying that there's this thing that we're not going to talk about because it's some airy fairy bullshit, and I'm a responsible, I'm taking care of my responsibilities, which is this thing that's completely separate from this other thing that is, but there's a moral imperative to do it this way, right? There's a moral imperative, like what I'm doing is I'm obviously virtue signaling that there's a sort of moral imperative to stay grounded in this one way of doing things. And then if you are like flying out to outer space to deal with this mystical nonsense, you are some airy fairy person who's neglecting your responsibility to stay grounded and leave that transcendent stuff for somebody. Like it's like this whole split is like, it's even like the whole thing, people are just unconsciously build their whole way of thinking about this, so that there's all this stuff which is basically like off limits on the other side of this wall that we call transcendence. But oftentimes it's just to be bullshit, a bullshit move to be like, oh, there's some things that we're going to talk about, there's some things we're not going to talk about, and there could be perfectly mundane, simple reasons why you don't want to talk about things, and you're just using the air of like spiritual superiority to be like, it's inevitable, you wouldn't understand, just the fact that you want to talk about it just means that you're identified with your mind and you are now lost in the matrix. And so that just because you think you want to talk about it just shows what a moron you are, basically. And the real mature thing to do is to just shut up and accept the reality that you're forced to deal with, right? And there's the one who can do that is the one who individuates as a man, becomes the archetypal male, right? Who is the stoic, reserve, and just accepts his lot in life and deals with it, right? Whereas the thing we have to understand about Deleuze and Guattari, or the Deleuze and Guattari project, is a combination of Friedrich Nietzsche and Lacanian Hegelianism, basically the psychoanalytic project of Freud and Lacan, and then where Slavoj Žižek is a guy who takes that in this very Hegelian Marxist dialectic direction, for whatever reason, I've just gravitated to Deleuze and Guattari of this Nietzschean divergence. It basically goes on this. The basic premise of this is that there's something about Carl Jung, especially after reading. Well, I don't know. Carl Jung comes off. There's something. Regardless of the man himself, there's something about trying. It's like a risky move to talk about to get into this stuff in the first place, because I have to admit that at some point in time, maybe I might have like. Have you guys ever gone on like a online group for young people who are into Jung? It's terrible. Like, I don't understand. Like, I understand why, if you just stick to Carl Jung himself, I can see that there's a certain maybe conservative bend to some of the stuff, but in the post Jordan Peterson era, just the general status quo of people who talk about Jung and archetypes, I can't handle it. Like I'm just, there's certain people who, even if you're the kind of person who uses Jung's name in your channel title, they're like, I'm just shocked that for somebody that I was reading since I've been in high school, that I've had friends who are really into them, that is like an important influence in my own life. I'm confused at like how people who associate themselves with Jung are like, I can't even stand 5 minutes of it. I have to turn it off, right? And that if like there's this is what I'm trying to say, is there's some kind of like if you understand my premise here is that Mercury retrograde is in this opposition to Pluto and Aquarius, and there's this whole Jungian idea about the age of Aquarius, and there's this whole energy of like all these other people who are into Carl Jung, all these other people that are into the age of Aquarius, all the other people that are into this archetypal shit, and there's some like force of like there's this complex knot of energy that is just, when I try to buy Jung books, and I'm blocked now. I can't even buy Jung books on the internet. But for some reason, the same computer gremlins that don't want me reading Jung are pushing me in the direction further in a Deleuze-Guattarian direction, right? There's some, and this is basically to tie it in with this whole situation where I'm doing this in front of my modular synth. I've already referenced this before, but there was a musical group called Coil who released an album called Worship the Glitch. And there's something about I kind of diverge from what a lot of people are talking about in terms of this sort of like futurist age of Aquarius that's all about the new technology of AI and the singularity and all this kind of stuff. I kind of like diverge a little bit from what I hear other astrologers talking about, because a lot of it seems to focus around the use of like LLM chatbots as to, induce spiritual psychosis or as a divination thing or whatever, right? I kind of find that to be kind of boring. But what I'm more interested in is like, what the hell is going on with why I can't order books from Princeton? That's more concerning to me than from some fucking LLM chatbot thing. Like why is it that if I order Deleuze from Princeton, I can, but if I try to order Jung from Princeton, I can't? And like, what this idea is like, is it like, am I being discriminated against? Am I being, what's in the black box that's presented? Because like, regardless, even if it's just a simple technical glitch or some kind of issue with my computer, or some kind of like, hopefully I'm not getting hacked or something, right? There's some kind of like issue where, regardless of what the actual mechanic of it is, what manifests out of that is me buying a bunch of Deleuze books and not buying a bunch of Jung books. And also this increasing gap between me and the Jungians, or that there's also some people that are, there's this whole thing on the internet where I don't know why, I assume that you get into a certain writer or a certain style of things, and you assume that other people who appreciate him more or less for the same reasons you do, and that you're going to share some kind of common bond with people who read the same stuff. But when it comes to like, I don't know. I don't want to pick I don't know. This is the problem. I think there's some kind of issue here where I have some creative obstacle in that if like the more I get involved with Carl Jung archetypes and Age of Aquarius, I'm just asking for trouble perhaps, right? But then the thing is, the other part is that there are a lot of stuff I do like. Another good example of this is that I was recorded a video blog recently. I do record some stuff that I don't upload, and I was recording something where I was talking about this book, Technic and Magic by Federico Campagna. There is some issue around, there's this kind of like fault line or like divide that I've noticed where there is like, I kind of want to like appeal to the New Agers, or like I mean, I guess if I'm making astrology, the whole thing is that astrology is inherently, or I'm going to do this project about like the age of Aquarius. It's like an inherently a kind of a new ager, archetypal, Jungian kind of thing. And there's something about in my actual experience of dealing with people who are kind of new age, there's some guy I knew on the internet from certain spiritual communities who was more of like a theosophy kind of guy. And as soon as I started like talking about Deleuze and Guattari, it created a huge rift between me and this guy. And then the same guy, when I started talking about Federico Campagna and Technic and magic, also just like seemed to get really upset about me reading this stuff. And then, but the thing is, he doesn't give any criticism that actually deals with the stuff other than just vague signaling that he doesn't like it for undisclosed reasons or whatever. And there's some kind of like, there's something about like the way I basically relate to it is that as somebody who's been reading Carl Jung since I was a teenager in high school, it's not really like, it's good. I think the funny part about it is that like of having an interest in this and then reading more and developing that interest and progressing, there's something about it where doing too much of it feels like it makes me more schizophrenic in the sense that the general understanding level of like the people around me or the people that I would usually talk to or like ordinary people seems to be kind of like at that starter, like getting into Carl Jung at high school level, or like it's also now it's worse in the Jordan Peterson era. But there's this basic point of like, if you're trying to like take this basic kind of entry point and go a little bit farther than that, then like, and everybody else is like, they just stop paying attention because they're like, oh yeah, I already know that. There's nothing more to talk about. There's nothing more to, and you just end up reading all this other stuff. Or like, there's something about like, there's this kind of also this, there's this kind of thing where you're like, I'm trying to at least contribute in a way. But I get ahead of myself because, well, whatever. I end up collecting more books than I know what to do with, and I haven't read them all yet. And I'm even in this immanence versus transcendence problem. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself if I haven't even read this Deleuze book yet, right? And so it's like, I'm not even gonna. Maybe I won't even try to answer that question right now. But I think like I'm just trying to say there's like certain. It's like there's this problem with Immanuel Kant and the way that everybody has been structured to think about things in this Kantian way that that prefigures the problem, right? That it's like that and this is a very Deleuzian thing, right? Where it's like the funny thing too about it is that it also goes with this my I guess I could say dead father issues. My dad used to always try to like stimulate my intellectual mind with these like philosophical problems, right? And it's like, is the world an inherently good place or an inherently bad place? And it's like, well, can't you see that by your where do you get that question from? And what are the prior assumptions and ideas that go into creating that assumption? And it's basically the question itself just creates this system that you are then placed in, and you have to like, fit in. It's like all the, it's like the whole, it's like you're being, it also reminds me of this thing of the Daedalus' labyrinth, right? Like your father has built you this massive labyrinth, and all the philosophy things are just like the questions, like to be like, oh, what, like, is the world like this or like that, or like, what's the answer? And it's like all this just traps you in some kind of labyrinth of like, this is all you have to, in order to, you have to do all these MacGuffins, right? Like you have to go through this door and get this key to open this thing and do that, and then to solve the puzzle, and then to fight the Minotaur and all. And then you're kind of like, well, hold on, like what if, like maybe we can do this in a way that you don't fucking trap my ass in the labyrinth with your question in the first place, and we can kind of like I'm kind of inherently a little bit more like deconstructionist rather, but then then that's the flight of Icarus, who eventually lands back in the labyrinth and gets his ass trapped again, right? What am I trying to say? I'm basically, this idea is I'm just riffing off this recent experience of not being able to buy as many Carl Jung books as I would have liked. And also perhaps my sense of self-consciousness if I'm just being a kind of a privileged white man who's just hoarding away Princeton, the Princeton library collection or something like that, right? And that I'm starting to feel like I'm part of the petit bourgeois, like this kind of class of intellectual elitists that has a smug superiority based on simply just collecting shelf warmers, things that just sit on the shelf. I don't read them. And then when I do encounter the people who actually are involved, I feel resentment and spite towards these simple people who are probably just like kids who are just like, because I think that's kind of problem. There's this issue of just like there's something you like, imagine being. I think I ran into the same problem with electronic music, because there's this like, if you're into electronic music, it's for some reason coded as a very like young person thing, and it's like, it's like this kind of thing of like, oh, like, back when you were in high school, you used to make beats and Fruity Loops, and now you're just some moron because you spend money on stuff. And it's like the same thing as, when I was in high school, I used to read like, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. And then you're like, oh, but now you're just like a little boy who wants to read, Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious or whatever, right? Or maybe you just get the Jung book on schizophrenia. I mean, that would be the good one, right? Or like, I just feel like you're the puer. I'm never going to grow up. You're just reading this, you're just going to, like, instead of making Fruity Loop beats, you're just going to spend a bunch of money on this bullshit. And then you're going to like buy a whole bunch of Carl Jung books. And then you're just going to like freak out when the Princeton online store declines your debit card or whatever, right? But then the thing is, if you go with this whole thing, then what does it mean that I got these ones, right? What does it mean that I've got the Deleuze books to read now? And is this a sign that I should just like drop the astrology shit, drop the Jungian shit, and go off in this Deleuzian direction where I don't have to? There's some kind of inherent there's something inherent friction in it where like people are just like, they just give you like. They're not going to tell you what the problem with Deleuze is, because that would like involve them actually having to like engage with the material. So instead they just like scoff at you and shake their heads and like there's some kind of like that, or like, but I don't know if I'm going to get along with Deleuzians either. So I basically just cornered myself into this weird hole when I'm like, and yeah, I'm getting my friends are encouraging me. This is kind of like, there's some kind of basic issue around this, in that if I just keep running with it a little bit, there's some issue here about the basic idea is that in this book, Aion, this is, I don't know, this will just be a preview. Like if maybe I'll become one of these video essay guys, and instead of just making these raw unedited videos, I'll put the work in and really compile some impressive stuff together for you, right? But I don't know. So, anyways, there's this footnote here. Footnote on page 94. The point where the ecliptic intersects with the meridian at the tail of the second fish coincides roughly with the 16th century, the time of the Reformation, which, as we know, is so extraordinarily important for the history of Western symbols. Since then, the spring point has moved along the southern edge of the second fish and will enter Aquarius in the course of the third millennium. Footnote 84. Now, see, the third millennium is quite a ways away. But footnote 84 says, since the delimitation of the constellations is known to be somewhat arbitrary, this date is very indefinite. This is the whole problem with the age of Aquarius, is that if you take it seriously at all, even Carl Jung, one of the most serious age of Aquarius people of them all, admits that it's an indefinite date. It's like, because the signs do not take up perfect 30 degrees of the sky or the constellations. There's this, if you're really serious about astrology, you have to understand that signs are just 30-degree chunks of sky, and constellations are not evenly distributed, and there's this question of where do you really measure from. But anyways, it refers to the actual constellation of fixed stars, not to the zodion, i.e. the zodiac, divided into sectors of 30 degrees each. Right with you there, Carl. Okay. Astrologically, the beginning of the next Aion, according to the starting point you select, falls between AD 2000 and AD 2200. Starting from star O and then assuming a Platonic month of 2,143 years, one would arrive at AD 2154 for the beginning of the Aquarian Age. And at AD 1987, if you start from star A113, the latter date agrees with the longitude of the stars in Ptolemy's Almagest. So this is the whole thing, is that Carl Jung admits that there's kind of indefinite, and Carl Jung gives two potential start dates. One of being in 2154 as the start of the age of Aquarius, or at 1997. And basically, there's this, all the good anime came out in 1997, including Serial Experiments Lain, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and both of those animes include, in Serial Experiments Lain, there's this funny alien guy wearing a Freddy Krueger shirt that they never really explain what the deal is with the alien, right? And then in Evangelion, there's this whole thing about the aliens that are angels, right? They don't even talk about to call them aliens. They're always just calling them. There's this whole thing where people are always like, oh, maybe the UFOs are not extraterrestrials, and maybe it's not nuts and bolts mechanical stuff. Maybe they're actually a spiritual force. And there's all this stuff about I found this book, this Flying Saucers, where Carl Jung talks about this. I actually have an astrologer friend. This is the kind of things I feel odd about this, because I'm a person who, well, I don't know. I have astrologer friends that I know from, doing online internet collaborations, who will do things like wanting to do, like, we're going to do a retreat where they had go to Portugal, where they had those sightings of the Fatima or something like that. And it's just like, I don't know. I'm like a sort of like slightly mentally unstable, person who is never met you, and you want me to like shell out all this money to go to Portugal to go chase a UFO sighting. And it's like, I don't really, there's something about this, which is just feels like, I feel like there's something about I'm kind of at odds a little bit with this whole community for that reason. And there's also certain astrologers who collaborate around these topics, who try to make the argument that, I'm just going off of what Carl Jung said in Aion here, giving two dates, one for 2154, one for 1997. But there are other astrologers who try to make arguments that, like, oh, the age of Aquarius has already started. And there's everybody's, or even in the 60s, they tried to argue that the age of Aquarius started in the 60s because you had a stellium of a lot of planets in Aquarius. And I don't know. I'm trying to be honest about how much I believe in this and how much I don't believe in it. But there's still this basic issue here, around, I could just, what if you, instead of getting caught up on what is literally concretely real, what if you operate with a kind of what if logic of speculation, right? What if you speculate that Carl Jung actually did get it right, or that he is using the date given by Ptolemy, Ptolemy was like, for a certain chunk of time, Ptolemy just took over astrology, and that was what everybody associated with astrology, right? And Ptolemy was very firm about it just being 1997, right? So if you're getting in, and you're going to be like, if the age of Aquarius is real, Carl Jung was right, Ptolemy was right, and the age of Aquarius started, and the vision of the age of Aquarius is all this anime that came out. I would recommend Perfect Blue, Serial Experiments Lain, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, and these are all Aquarian visions of the future, right? And now you have this whole problem about like the Christian millenarianism and the singularity, right? This idea that Christians have always been obsessed with the apocalypse, even before the modern era, or there's this thing where the Christians started to relate to the age of modernity as the apocalypse, right? The end of the world, right? Or the end of the old world, the beginning of a new world, and that modernity was the age of Aquarius, right? Or else that the age of Aquarius hasn't even arrived yet, and if you go with if you use a different star, it's going to be like more than 100 years in the future, right? But there's this idea that basically, I'm going to make the argument here for this, that using the as if true, what if true, that there is the substantive argument around this that I would make is that the Christian religion, most religions being about 2,000 years old, there's a lot of morality that is based on circumstantial things at the time. I'm not going to get into this sort of like new atheist argument against like all the moral codes of the Bible, but there are certain things like the one I often think of is like shellfish, right? There's something about, from a very practical point of view, there are certain, like here sometimes we have red tide, right? When there aren't, without making a transcendent morality out of it, there's a very imminent reason that's it's not really moral, but it's just like, you don't want to eat something that's going to make you sick. From a very practical, pragmatic point of view, there's not really any reason to moralize about it. It's just that it's good for you to be healthy. It's bad for you to be sick. So if you want to be healthy, these are some things you can do. And there's certain things that to some certain extent that a lot of the moral codes are just kind of be like, it's like, that it's like that South Park where it's like, if you do this, you're not going to have a good time, right? If you're going to have a good time, don't eat the shellfish when it's red tide or all this kind of stuff, right? But there's certain relativity in knowing that when it's red tide, don't eat the shellfish, but a different season, you're not at risk of that, so you can get away with it, right? And you can have, this is kind of like, instead of having some transcendent moral order, you can understand exactly why it's a bad idea and not get into it's because you're being punished. God is punishing you for being a bad person by making you sick for eating this shellfish thing. You don't have to do that. You can look at it very, but in that, what I'm trying to say is that if you take that and extend that to our modern era, where we have such a different situation in terms of technology and our ability to structure our society in a certain way, that I think frustrates a lot of people, because it feels very artificial, right? It feels like we have all these fancy gadgets and doodads, but we're like cavemen trapped in business suits or something. Like this is what Freud was talking about with civilization and its discontents, right? Like there's some basic like the acceleration of technological progress happened too quickly, And it feels like we are at odds with our techno structure, right? Or the structure of our whole environment and our civilization and all this. And there's all these people who are like paleo conservatives who want to be like, go back to regress to cavemen. It would be like Conan the Barbarian, like, you know, these cavemen dudes or whatever, right? And there's like, in the face of all this, I think the basic problem is that we're not going to go back to the dawn of time. We have to deal with the situation as it is, but there's just so many factors of the inherent moral problems in our age that we're just not, if you just take it this very practical thing, as if like you're going to think of what's important to put in your book, your holy book, and you're going to put things about not eating shellfish, you got like, maybe there's a shelf life to this. Maybe there's a certain like, this only lasts so long, and then you're going to have to like you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and reassess what parts of this are important, what parts aren't. But there's also this problem though, that if you do that, you don't want to play this. There's this problem where if you like go and like apparently I think it was like some of the founding fathers of America, was it Thomas Jefferson? I think that, oh my God, this is why I should do edits. I should fact check this. But I think it was Thomas Jefferson who decided to like take the Bible and just like cut out all the parts he didn't like, basically kind of like scrapbook, like doing like a vision board where you just take out, you know, use the Bible for like motivational, inspirational quotes and just take a few bits out and then throw the rest of it out there. And like, you know, because you are the master of your own destiny, you can do what you want. You don't have to be obedient to church. You just do your own shit, right? And there's this kind of like irreverent, like this is like the heart of American freedom, is all like, oh, we can just make our own religion if we want to, right? And I think there's some kind of like inherent friction between that and people who think that there's, you know, it's a little bit arrogant and maybe ignorant to just like to think that you have the ability to do that all by yourself or whatever, right? And there's some kind of like the new age, there's some kind of inherent neo-reactionary backlash against this process of like, let's just break it all down and rewrite the rules, because it's like it's a big reset, right? This is why everybody is all like up in arms against like the Great Reset idea, or like the COVID thing, as like we're gonna like reset the way we do everything, right? But I think this, or like the shock doctrine too, right? We're just going to shock everybody with all these crazy events, and then before people have a time to react, we'll just implement some kind of new order. The new order has arrived, and it's us the rich and powerful elite that write the rules, because we're the aristocratic class, and we're preserving the old order of the archetypal ideals, or whatever. I mean, there's kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm going overboard. This is what I got so far. I might do more later. I may consider creating a more of a edited together video essay, although I kind of also feel like maybe not. I don't know. I'm just gonna have to play it by ear. But I don't know. Hopefully, this is kind of where my process is going now. Hopefully, it seems at least some of you guys are interested. Thanks for watching.